The union representing Air Canada's flight attendants says it will risk jail time by directing its 10,000 flight attendants to remain on strike. That's after the Federal Labour Relations Board declared the strike illegal this morning. Flight attendants were ordered back to work Sunday afternoon after the federal government stepped in. The union said today that Ottawa is impeding workers' charter rights through this action.
It is an essential part of collective bargaining and for workers to have a say in their collective future. These rights have to mean something. And real negotiations cannot happen if only one side is banking on the government taking away the rights of another party. And that is what has happened here.
Jobs Minister Patty Hajdu joins me now. Welcome.
Thank you.
So you've announced that your department will be launching a probe on unpaid wages. With what's going on now, everything we've heard from the unions right now, do you really think that's enough to mitigate workers' concerns?
Well, it's been one of the key components that we've heard of from flight attendants, and in fact, many commentators that have been following along have been, really struck by the fact that the allegations of unpaid work have been repeated and consistent. And it's deeply concerning as the Labour Minister responsible for the Canada Labour Code. Because in fact, the Labour Code has protections for workers, federally regulated workers, and in fact prohibits unpaid work. So I'm concerned deeply by this allegation, and if there are loopholes that employers are using to get around the Canada Labour Code, we have to know and we have to close them.
Okay, but a probe into allegations is not, everyone says this is happening and it's been happening for years. So it's not like the government's just becoming aware of this unpaid work. It's been a long-standing issue. There's been legislation put before the House by both opposition parties about this. So is a probe actually going to assuage what we're dealing with right now?
Well, I think I'll get to the root of the problem. In fact, I asked the Labour Department if there have been actual filings of dispute with the Labour Department about unpaid work, and to my knowledge, there haven't been any. So the curious problem is that there's these deeply disturbing allegations of unpaid work. There isn't really a history of the Labour Department being asked to act on behalf of an aggrieved worker, and yet people are deeply concerned about this practice in the airline industry in particular. And so I think we have to get to the bottom of it, quite frankly. I think we have to understand the extent of this unpaid work, when it's happening, how employers are getting around their legal obligations under the Canada Labour Code to pay their employees. And then, should we find that there are loopholes, seek the appropriate remedy for those loopholes.
Okay, so speaking of remedies, let's turn to Section 107 of the Canada Labour Code, which you invoked, that directs the CIRB to impose this back-to-work order. This is the very piece of legislation, or this section of it, that some unions are taking your government to court over. So seeing the pushback now, and we just saw this clip saying they're willing to go to jail and incur the fine, seeing that kind of pushback, I guess we have to ask, was this a misstep by your government this weekend?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'd say nothing precludes the parties right now from sitting down together and concluding their collective agreement negotiations. In fact, they started in December. They've been aided by the Federal Mediation Service since May. And just last Friday night, I brought all the parties together in a joint meeting, and I said, for the love of the country, let's get a deal. The employer actually did table a deal, and at that point, the union said that they were at an impasse. So with both parties saying there's no further room to negotiate, it was clear that they needed an assisted tool. And that's exactly what arbitration is. The arbitrator can listen to both sides. They start from the last tabled offer, which would be the offer tabled Friday night, and they work on the remaining items together with both parties. Having said that, as I said, both parties right now could decide that they want to return to the table and get the deal together. And I would argue that's always the best solution for workers and for employers.
So I want to get to the impasse part in a moment. But in terms of that pushback, you now have other unions, including the umbrella group of the Canadian Labour Congress, coming out in support of QP against your decision to invoke Section 107. Are you concerned? I mean, there are people who are talking about the potential for a national strike. I mean, when you talked on the weekend, it was all about, well, we really want labour peace. It feels like we're getting the opposite of labour peace. Are you concerned about a possible national strike?
Look, this is never an easy choice, and it certainly wasn't an easy choice this time. Obviously, this is deeply impactful for both the employer and the union when the Labour Relations Board is asked to intervene. But clearly, Canada's economy is experiencing stress. Canadians, about 140,000 passengers a day, are stranded without any way to return. And it's a really challenging time for Canadians. Given that both parties stated that they were at an impasse, it was clear they needed another tool. As I said, I hope that they will return to talks together. The Canadian Industrial Relations Board actually has mediators as well. So if they choose to use mediation, they can do that right now. And I would encourage them to do so.
Now, when you talked about the impasse, I mean, this is where critics and labour experts are saying, but the ready use of Section 107, and this is not the first time your government has stepped in invoking this section, really tells employers you don't really have to bargain. You can claim an impasse, you can create an impasse, even if they're not the only ones saying there's an impasse, with the understanding that the government's going to step in because of concerns over the economy. And yet that takes away the right to strike for these workers, which is one of the only tools they have compared to many tools that employers have. So, what do you say to people and critics and labour experts who say that that is the problem with this tool?
Look, I would say that collective bargaining is a super important principle in this country that this government fully believes in. And as you know,
can believe in it and not actually have the actions to support it.
And as you know, in fact, actually 97% of labor disputes are resolved without strike action, with support for mediation, yes. But there are times where it is clear that the parties are protracted, cannot agree on a collective agreement. And in fact, when both parties say that they're at an impasse, they clearly need another tool, and that's what we've provided them. The arbitrator has a role now. Should this continue with an arbitration in an arbitration setting, as I said, my hope is that the parties will realize the faster path to getting a deal, and I think everybody has a vested interest in that, including the corporation, is to sit down and figure out the terms of this new collective agreement together.
So we have this situation, however, where they've been directed back to work. They're saying they're not going to do that unless they have the deal that they're looking for, what they say is a fair deal. That could result in fines. It could result in jail, something the unions say that they're willing to take on for this principle. Would you support that happening, going ahead? What would the government do if they're starting to have union leaders go to jail because of this?
Look, these are decisions that the board will take, that the federal courts will take, and I can't predict what's going to happen. But what I can say is that there's an opportunity and an off-ramp right now. Everybody can put a little bit of water in their wine, both on the corporation side, on the union side. That's what bargaining is about. It's about getting the best deal that you can, knowing that you're not going to have all of your needs satisfied, either on the employer side or on the union side. And they have an opportunity right now to sit down together to work this out.
But how do employees and those negotiating on behalf of employees get the best deal if they don't have the tool, the one tool available to them, and that is to withdraw their work?
Look, it was encouraging to me on Friday night when I met with all parties that they did agree to work through the night and that there was another offer tabled. When the union declared an impasse, it was clear that there was a tool needed, and these are never easy decisions. I want to tell you that I don't think any labor minister takes these decisions lightly, but obviously with the safety, security of Canadians all around the world, and with an economy that needs to be protected in this particular time, it was the right decision.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.